in a town where whispers roam. A wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window panes. A cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room. From dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales, we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. We dive into realms where the wild things play. In the warmth of the night, we drift far away. Each story a bond, each laughter a thread. In our little haven, we conquer what's said. With friendship as
Hi everyone, how are we doing tonight? Congrats on getting first guilty, and congrats on getting second salty. I actually have cats on the camera for once. They've realized they have a bed over there. But how has everyone's day been? Salty's on a 10, guilty's on a 5. Thank you for following so often. I'm doing pretty good. I don't have the kittens anymore. They moved next door to be around more people than just me. But they also get used to being around people, dogs, and yeah. They're already used to my cats. But they went from being in my fairly spacious garage where they could play around to a bathroom at the moment until they get used to people. Then they get to have free reign of the house. So it'll be interesting. In the meantime, I've got to keep taking care of their mother and their older sibling, so At least until I can get them caught and fixed. And then they can go back into the wild if they so choose. It's always kind of sad to be a foster and have to give up the kittens. But we are doing more from the... Yeah. Mine are old. I've had them all since kittens. Let's see, Tabby is 9 years old and the Fluffball is 6. Whereas one that you can't see is 12. So I've got old cats. Not the oldest cat I've had yet. Is my oldest one lived to 13. So, but we are doing more of the secret Commonwealth of elves, fauns, and fairies tonight, which was originally written but not officially published because the author died of mysterious reasons in 1691, and it was reprinted with commentary by Andrew Lang in 1893, which means he did this before the fairy books that I've been reading. But since this is technically a non-fiction book, we're doing it from study. It's still strange that I have books as old as I do. And stranger still that they're being reprinted. I'm half tempted to write my own introduction for this one and republish it, but I probably won't. I'm still trying to convince myself to do the other books of Grimm's Fairy Tales. What amount is that? Okay, sit. Yeah. So this is technically an essay, but it's a very long essay, so most essays aren't in chapters. And last week I finished section 7 of chapter 1. Sneef. That is definitely Sneef. So this is technically an educational stream since I'm reading nonfiction. And I do apologize ahead of time because I'm probably going to mispronounce a lot of things because of the long S and the printing. Because long S's look like F's. Let's see, of course, started with weaponry. Might be able to get into the second chapter tonight. But if you're ready, I'll get into the reading. Section 8. Their weapons are most what solid earthly bodies, nothing of iron, but much of stone, like the yellow soft flint spa, shapes like a barbed arrowhead, and flung like a dart, with great force. These arms, cut by air and tools of something, if it seems beyond humane, have something of the nature of thunderbolt futability, and morally wounding the vital parts without breaking the skin, of which wounds I have observed in beasts and felt them with my own hands. They are not as infallible Benjamites, hitting at a hair's breadth, nor are they wholly unvanquishable, at least in appearance. The men of the second sight do not do not discover strange things when asked, but at fits and raptures, if inspired with some genius of the instant, which more did lurk in or about them. Thus I have frequently spoke to one of them, who is his transport told he cut the body of one of those people in two with his iron weapon, and so escaped his unset. Yet he saw nothing left behind of that disappearing divided. At other times he wrestled some of them. His neighbors often perceived this man to disappear at a certain place, and about 1 hour after to become invisible, and discover himself near a bowshot of the first place. It was in that place where he became invisible, said he, that the subterraneans did encounter and combat with him. Those who are unseen or unsanctified, called Fae, are said to be pierced or wounded in those people's weapons, which makes them do somewhat very unlike their former practice, causing a sudden alteration, yet the cause thereof unperceivable at present, nor have they power, either they cannot make use of their natural powers, or asked not the heavenly aid, to escape the blow impendent. Hey, Matsu. A man of the second sight perceived a person standing by him, sound to others' view, wholly gored in blood, and he, amazed-like, bid him instantly to flee. The whole man laughed at this airt and warning, since there was no appearance of danger. He had scarce contracted his lips from laughter when unexpectedly his enemy leapt in at his side and stabbed him with their weapons. They also pierce cows or other animals, usually said to be elfsrat, whose purest substance, if they die, these subterraneans take to live on, viz., the aerial or ethereal parts, the most superstitious matter or prolonging of life, such as antiquae, moderately taken, is among liquors having the terrestrial behind. The cure of such hurts is only for a man to find out the hole in his finger, as is the spirits flowing from man's orm hand were antidote sufficient against their polisoned darts. 9. As birds and beasts whose bodies are much used to the change of this fry and open to the air, foresee storms, so those invisible people are more sagacious to understand by the books of natures things to come than we, who are pestered with the grosser dregs of all elementary mixtures, and have our purer spirits choked by them. The deer scents out a man in powder, though a late invention, at the great distance, a hungry hunter, bred, and the raven a carrion. Their brands being long classified as high and subtle air, will observe a very small change in a thrice. Thus a man of the second sight, perceiving the operations of these forecastings invisible people among us, indulged thorough a stupendous providence to give warnings of some remarkable events, either in the air, earth, or waters. And he saw a winding shroud creeping in the walking heathful person's legs till it come to the knees, and afterwards it came up to the middle, then to the shoulders, and at last over the head, which was visible to no other person. And by observing the spaces of time betwixt these several stages, he easily guessed how long the man was to live who wore the shroud, for when it approached his head, he told that such a person was ripe for the grave. 10. There are many places called Faerie-Hills, which the mountain people think impious and dangerous to peel or discover by taking earth or wood from them, superstitiously believing the souls of their predecessors to dwell there. And for that end, they, a moat or mound was dedicated beside every churchyard to receive the souls till their adjacent bodies arise, and so become as a Faerie-Hill, the useful bodies of the air when called abroad. They also affirm those creatures that move so invisibly in a house and haft great stones do but do not much hurt, because counterwrought by some more courteous and charitable spirits that are everywhere ready to defend men. Dan 10:13. To be the souls that have not attained their rest, throughout the vehement desire of revealing a mother or notable injury done or received, or a treasure that was forgot in their lifetime on earth, which, when disclosed to a conjurer alone, the ghost quite removes. In the next country to that of my former residence, about the year 1676, when there was some scarcity of grain, a marvelous elapse in the vision strongly struck the imagination of two women in one night, living at a good distance from one another, about the treasure hid in a hill, called Sithbarach and Faerie-Hill. The appearance of the treasure was first represented to the fancy, and then an audible voice came and placed where it was their waking senses. Whereupon both arose, and meeting accidentally at the place, discovered their design, and jointly digging found a vessel as large as a Scottish peck, full of small pieces of good money, of ancient coin, which having betwixt them, they fold into dishfuls and dishfuls of meal into the country people. Very many of undoubted credit saw and of the coin this day. But whether it was good or bad angel, one of the subterranean people, or the restless soul of him who hid it, that discovered it, and to what end it was done, I leave to the examination of others. 11. These subterraneans have controversies, doubts, disputes, feuds, and siding of parties, there being some ignorance in all creatures, and the vastest created intelligences not compassing all things. As to vice and sin, whatever their own laws be, sure according to ours, and equally natural, civil, and revealed, they transgress and commit acts of injustice and sin, by what is said above, as to their stealing of nurses to their children, and of other sort of plagiarism, and catching our children away, may seem to the heir some estate in those invisible dominions, which never return. For the inconvenience of their succubi, who tryst with men, it is abominable. For the swearing and intemperance, they are not observed, so subject to the irregularities as envy, spite, hypocrisy, lying, and dissimulation. So, fairies are succubi, in case you weren't sure. Though it's not in this book, it's in one of the Irish ones, which is on my throne wish list. Fairies are people in between. They were not angels nor demons, but they're not humans. They, at one time, were considered part of the angelic chorus, but when the demons fell, they were the ones who didn't go with either way. So, it's interesting research into the fairies, especially since they have similar fairies in several different countries, and they all basically believe the same thing. Of course, after reading, 375 fairy tales, just in the Andrew Lang books alone, I kind of believe it. Anyway, 12. As our religion obliges us not to make a peremptory or curious search into these obstrucencies, so that the histories of the ages give as many plain examples of extraordinary occurrences as make the modest inquiry not contemptible. How much is written of pygmies, fairies, nymphs, sirens, apparitions, which, though not the 10th part true, yet could not spring of nothing. Even English authors relate of Berry Island and Glamorganshire, that laying your ear to the cliff on the rocks and blowing bellows, striking of hammers and clashing of armors, flying of iron will be heard distinctly ever since Merlin enchanted those subterranean wights through a forward mangle forging of arms to Aurelius Ambrosius and his Britons till he returned, which Merlin being killed in battle, and not coming to loose the knot, these active Vulcans are there tied to their perpetual labor. But to dip no deeper into this well, I must next give some account how the seer, my informer, comes to have the secret way of correspondence beyond other mortals. Again, I'm having trouble with long S's and reading, because, again, they look like F's. There be odd sommonities in investing a man with privileges of the whole mystery of this second sight. He must run a tether of hair, which abound of corpse in the byre, in a helix about his middle from end to end, then bow his head downwards, as did Elijah in 1 Kings 18:42, and look back through his legs until he fly a funeral advance till the peoples cross 2 marches, or look thus back through a hole that was a knot in the fur. But if the wind change points while the hair tether is tied about him, he is in peril of his life. The usual method for a curious person to get transient sight of his otherwise indivisible crew of subterraneans, if impotently or other rashly fought, is to put his left foot under the wizard's right foot, and the seer's hand, and put in the inquirer's head, who is to look over the wizard's right shoulder, be he's an ill appearance, as if his by ceremony any implicit surrender were made of all betwixt the wizard's foot and his hand, or the person can be admitted to bravado of the art. Then he will see a magnitude of wights, like furious hardy men, flocking to him hastily from all quarters, as thick as atoms in the air, which are no non-entities or phantasms, creatures proceeding from one affrighted apparition, confused or crazed sense, but realities appearing to a stable man in his awakening sense, and enduring the rational trial of their being. These throughout fear strick him the beliefs, and speechless. The wizard, defending the lawfulness of his skill, forbids such horror, and comforts his novice by telling of Zacharias as being struck speechless at fleeing apparitions. Luke 1:20. Then he further maintains his art by vouching Elijah to have had the same, and disclosed it thus unto the servant in 2 Kings 6:17, when he blinded the Syrians, and Peter in Act 5:9, foreseeing the death of Sapphira by perceiving as it were her winding sheet around her beforehand, and Paul in the 2 Corinth 12:4, who got such a vision and sight as should not nor be told. Eliza also in his chamber saw Gehazi, his servant, at a great distance taking a reward from Naaman. 2 Kings 5:26. Hence were the prophets frequently called seers, or men of a second or more exalted sight than others. He acts for his person also, Matthew 4:8, where the devil undertakes to give even Jesus the sight of all nations, and the finest things in the world at one glance, though in their natural situations and stations are vast distance from each other. And 'tis said expressly he did not sigh them, not on a map it seems, nor in a fantastic magical juggling of the sight, which he could not impose upon so discovering the person. It would appear then to have been a sight of real solid substances, and things of worth which he intended as a bait for his purpose. Whence it might seem, comparing the relation to Matthew's 4:8 with the former, that the extraordinary or second sight can be given by the ministry of as bad as well as good spirits of those that will embrace it. An instance of Basum and the parenthesis make it nothing the less probable. Thus also the seer trains his scholar by telling of the graduations of nature, ordered by a wife of Providence, that as the sight of bats and owls transcend that of shrews and moles, so that vision faculties of men are clearer than those of owls, and eagles and lynxes and cats are brighter than that of men's. And again, that men of the second sight, being designed to give warnings against secret engines, surpass the ordinary vision of other men, which in a native habits in some descended from their ancestors, and acquired as an artificial improvement of their natural sight in others. Resembling in their own kind the usual artificial helps the optic glasses, as perspectives, telescopes, and microscopes, without the astucious aids those men who treated to do perceive things that, for their smallness or subtlety and secrecy, are invisible to others, though daily conversant with them. They having such a beam continually about them as that of the sun, which when it shines clearly only lets eyes see the atoms in the air that without those rays they could not discern. For some have the second sight transmitted from the father to the son throughout the whole family, without their own consent, and others teaching proceeding only from a bounty of providence, it seems, or by a compact, or by complexional quality of the first acquirer. As it may seem alike strange, yet nothing vicious, and such as Master Greatrake, the Irish Stroker, Seventh Sons, and the others that cure the king's evil and chase away defeats and pains, with only stroking of the afflicted part, which, if it be not of the reliquies of mechanical apparitions, or some secret virtue in the womb of the parent which increases until 7 sons are born, and decreases by the famed degrees afterwards, proceeds only from the sanctive bow from the healthful constitutions. Virtue going out from them is spirituous effluxes unto the patient, and their vigorous healthy spirits affecting the sick, as usually as unhealthy sins of the sick infect the whole unfound. 13. The minor sort of seers prognosticate many future events only for a month's space, from the shoulder bone of a sheep on which the knife never came, for as before it is said, and the Nazarists of old had something of it, iron hinders all of the operations of those that travel in the intrigues in these hidden dominions. By looking into the bone, they will tell if whoredom is committed by the owner's wife, what money the master of the sheep had, if any will die out of the house for that month, and if any cattle there will take as a planet struck. Then they will prescribe a preservative and prevention. 14. A woman, it seems one exception from the general rule, singularly wife of these matters is Foresight, living in a college in Collins, and rife with the Herbites in the time of mischief of Montrose, his wars with the states of Scotland, being notorious among many, and so examined by some that violently seized that isle, if she saw them coming or not. She said she saw them coming many hours before they came in view of the isle. But earnestly looking, she sometimes took to them for enemies, sometimes for friends, and moreover they looked as if they went from the isle, not as men approaching it, which made her not put the inhabitants on their guard. The matter was that the barge wherein the enemy sailed was a little before taken, and the inhabitants of a little same of the isle, and the men had their backs towards the isle when they were plying the oars towards it. Thus this old scout and Delphian oracle was at the least deceived, and did not deceive. Being asked who gave her such signs and warnings, she said that as soon as she set three crosses of straw upon the palm of her hand, a great ugly beast sprang out of the earth near her and flew in the air. If what she inquired had success according to her wish, the beast would descend calmly and lick up the crosses. If it would not succeed, the beast would furiously thrust her and the crosses over on the ground, and so vanished in his place. 15. Among other instances of undoubted verity, proving that these being of such aerial peoples and species of creatures not vulgarly known, I add the subsequent relation some whereof I have from my acquaintance with the actors and patients of the rest of the eyewitnesses to the matter of fact. The first whereof shall be of the woman taken out of her childbed, and having a lingering image of her substituted body in her room, which resembles decayed and died, and was buried. But the person stolen returning to her husband after 2 years' space, being convinced by many undeniable tokens that she was his former wife, admitted her home, and had divers children with her. Among other reports she gave her husband, this was one, that she perceived little what they did in the spacious house she lodged in, until she anointed one of her eyes with a certain unction that was by her, which they perceiving to have acquainted her with her actions, they feigned her blind in that eye with a puff of their breath. She found the place full of light, without any fountain or lamp from whence it did spring. The person lived in the country next to that of my last residence, and might furnish matter of dispute amongst the cautious, whether if her husband had been married in the interim of her 2 years' absence, he was obliged to divorce from a second spouse at the return of the first. There is an air appearing without superstition for recovering of such that are stolen, but think it superfluous to insert it. I saw a woman of 40 years of age, and examined her, having another clergyman in my company, about the report that passed her long hair falling, her about a report that passed of her long hair fasting. Her name is not in here. It was told by them that the house, as well as herself, that she took very little or no food for several years past, that she tarried in the fields overnight, saw and conversed with a people she knew not, having wandered in seeking of her sheep, and slept upon a hillock, and finding herself transported to another place before day. The woman had a child since that time, and is still pretty melancholious and silent, hardly ever seen to laugh. Her natural heat and radical moisture seem to be equally balanced, like an unextinguished lamp, and going in a circle not unlike to the faint life of bees, and some sort of birds that sleep all the winter over and revive in the spring. It is usual in all magical arts to have candidates prophets as in a belief of their tutor's skill, and ability to perform their feats and act their juggling pranks and letterman, but a person called Stuart, possessed with a prejudice at that spoken of the second sight, and living near my house, was foe to it by seer, before many witnesses, that he lost his speech and power of his legs, and breathing excessively, as if expiring, because of the many fearful lights that appeared to him. The company were forced to carry him into the house. Thank you for the cheering, Guilty. It is notoriously known what in Killen within Perthshire fell tragically out with a yeoman that lived hard by, who coming to a company within an alehouse, where seers sat at table, and at the sight of the entranced neighbour, the seer starting rose to go out of the house, and being asked the reason of his haste, told that the entrant man should die within 2 days, at which news the named instant flabbed the seer, and was himself executed 2 days after for the fact. A minister, very intelligent but misbelieving in such sights, were not all ordinary, chancing to be in the narrow lane with a seer, who, perceiving a wight of a known visage, surfacely to encounter them, the seer designed to the minister to turn out of the way, who, scorning his reason, and holding himself in the path of them, when the seer was going hastily out of the way, they were both violently cast aside to a good distance, and the fall made them lame for all their life. A little after, the minister was carried home. One came to toll the bell for the death of the man whose representation met them in the narrow path some half an hour before. Another example is a seer in Kentry of Scotland, sitting at the table with divers others, suddenly did cast his head aside. The company asking him why he did it, he answered that such a friend of his by name, then in Ireland, threatened immediately to cast a dishful of butter at his face. The men wrote down the day and hour, and sent to the gentleman to know the truth, which deed the gentleman declared he did that very time, for he knew that his friend was a seer, and would make sport with it. The men that were present examined the matter exactly, and told me the story, and withal, the seer object with his optics perceived no other object so readily as this, at such a distance. Okay, so a friend that was visiting in Ireland knew his friend was a seer and did something know that it would make him react. And the seer reacted. That is why this is a study of folklore and psychical records. Psychical as in psychic. That is why it's comparing folklore with the science of psychic abilities. It's definitely an interesting read, but that was also the end of the chapter. This next part is a letter written to the original, to Robert Boyle, of predictions made by seers. And hopefully, it's still got the long S's. Man, I hate long S's. As I keep trying to read them as F. I know last week I said I would try to find a translation with the right lettering on it, but I got lazy and didn't bother. Why read something digital when you can read the copy in your hand? Right? Wait. Anyway. The next section is a succinct account of my Lord Talbot's relations in a letter to the Honorable Robert Boyle, Esquire, of the predictions made by seers, whereof himself was here and eye witness. And in parentheses, as I thought it fit to join it hereunto, that I might not be thought singular of this disquisition, that the matter of fact might be undeniable made out. Sounds like a plan. And this title is long. But it's a description of what it is, so it's expected. I'll try this again without stumbling so much. I thought fit to join it hereunto that I might not be thought singular in this disquisition, that a matter of fact might be undeniably made out, and that I might, with all submission, give annotations and admad diversions of the supposed causes of the phenomenon, with my reasons to dissent from this judgment. And another letter. Sir, I heard very much, but believed very little of the second sight, yet it is being assumed by Faerie with great veracity. I was induced to make inquiry after it in the year 1652, being then confined to abide in the north of Scotland by the English usurpers. The more general accounts of it were, that many Highlanders, yet far more Islanders, were qualified with the second sight, that men, women, and children indistinctly were subject to it, and children where parents were not. Sometimes people came to age who had not had it when young, nor could by any tell what the means produced. It is a trouble to most of them who are subject to it, and they would be rid of it at any rate if they could. The sight is no long duration, only continuing so long as they can keep their eyes steady without blinking. The hardy therefore fix their look, that they may see the longer, but the timorous see only glances. Their eyes always twinkle as at the first sight of the object. That which generally is seen by them are the species of living creatures and of inanimate things which was in motion, such as ships and habits on persons. They never see the species of any person who is already dead. What they foresee fails not to exist in the mode, and in that place where it appears to them. They cannot well know what space and time shall intervene between the apparition and the real existence. But some of the hardiest and longest experience have some rules for conjectures, and if they see a man with a throwing sheet in the apparition, they will conjecture that the nearness and remoteness of his death by the more or less that his bodice is covered by it. They will ordinarily see their absent friends, though at a great distance, sometimes no less than from America to Scotland, sitting, standing, or walking in some certain place, when they conclude with the assurance that they will see them so and there. If a man be in love with a woman, they will ordinarily see the species of that man standing by her, and so likewise in a woman in love, and they conjecture at their enjoyments of each other by a species touching of in person appearing in the distance from her, if they not enjoy one another. If they see the species of any person who is sick to die, they see them covered over with a shrouding sheet. Okay. These generals I had verified by me, such of them as did she, and were esteemed honest and sober by all the neighborhood, for I inquired after such for my information, and because there were more of these seers in the Isles of Lewis, Harris, and Uist than any other place, I did not entreat Sir James MacDonald, who is now dead, Sir Norman MacLeod, and Mr. Daniel Morrison, a very honest person, who are still alive, to make inquiry in such uncouth sight, and to acquaint me therewith, which they did, and all found an agreement of these generals, and informed me of many instances confirming what they said. But though men of discretion and honor, being at the second hand, I will choose rather to put myself than my friends on the hazard of being laughed at for the incredible relations. I was once traveling in the Highlands, and a good number of servants with me, as is usual there. and one of them going a little before, entering into a house where I was to stay the night, and going hastily to the door, and suddenly stepped back with a screech, and when a stone fell which hit his foot. I asked what the matter was, so he seemed to be very much frightened. He told me that very seriously that I should not lodge in the house, because shortly a dead coffin would be carried out of it, for many were carrying it, and when he heard the cry. I neglected his words, and staying there, I said to the other of his servants he was sorry for it, and that surely what he saw would shortly come to pass. Though no sick person was there yet, the landlord, a healthy Highlander named by Anne Apophelchik, fit before I left the house. A healthy Highlander died of an apoplectic fit before I left the house. That's creepy. In the year 1653, Alexander Monroe, afterward Lieutenant Colonel to the Earl of Dunbarton's regiment, and I were walking in the place of Ullabille and Lochboom, on a little plain at the foot of a rugged hill. There was a servant working with a spade in the walk before us. His back was to us, and his face to the hill. Before we came to him, he let the spade fall, and looked toward the hill. He took notice of us as we passed near him, which made me look at him, and perceiving him to stare a little strangely, I conjectured him to be a seer. I called to him, at which he started and smiled. "What are you doing?" said I. He answered, "I've seen a very strange thing. An army of Englishmen, leading of houses, coming down the hill, and a number of them are come down to the plain and eating the barley which is growing in the field near to the hill." This was on the 4th of May, for I noted the day, and it was 4 or 5 days before barley was sown in the field he spoke of. Alexander Monroe asked him how he knew they were Englishmen. He said because they were leading of the houses, and had hats and boots, which they knew no Scot would have there. We took little notice of the whole story, as other than the foolish vision, but wished that an English party were there, and we were being at the war with them, and the place almost inaccessible for housemen. But in the beginning of August thereafter, the Earl of Middleton, then lieutenant for the King of the Highlands, having occasion to march a party of his toward the South Highlands, he sent his foot through a place called Inverloch, and the fore party, which was first down the hill, did fall off eating the barley which was on the little plain under it. And Monroe, calling to mind what the seer told us, in May preceding, he wrote of it, and sent an express to me in Laughlin, in Rolfs, where I was then with it. I had occasion once to be a company where a young lady was, excuse my not naming the persons, and I was told there was a notable seer in the company. I called him to speak with me, and I did ordinarily when I found any of them, and after he had answered a few several questions, I asked if he knew any person to be in love with that lady. He said he did, but knew not the person, for during the 2 days he had been in her company, he perceived one standing near her, and his head leaning on her shoulder, which he said did foretell that the man should marry her before and die before her, according to his observation. This was in the year 1655. I desired him to describe the person, which he did, so that I could conjecture, by the description of such one, who was the lady's acquaintance. There were no thoughts of the marriage until 2 years after, and having occasion in the year 1657 to find the seer, who was an islander, in company with the other person whom I conjectured to have been described by him, I called him aside, and asked if that person he saw beside the lady 2 years ago apart. He said it was he indeed, for he had seen the lady just then standing by him hand in hand. This was some months before their marriage, and the man has since died, and the lady still alive. I shall trouble you but one more, which I thought most remarkable of any of that occurred to me. In January 1652, the above-mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Alex Monroe and I happened to be in the house of one William MacLeod in Fenera, the county of the Rolfs. He, the landlord, and I were sitting in 3 chairs near the fire, and in the corner was a great chimney. There were 2 islanders who were very nigh to come to the house, and were related to the landlord. While the one of them was talking to Monroe, I perceived the other look oddly towards me. From this look, and his being an islander, I conjectured him a seer, and asked him at what he stared. He answered, by desiring me to rise from that chair, and for it an unlucky one. I asked him why. He answered because there was a dead man in the chair next to me. Well, said I, if it be the next chair, I may keep my own. But what is the likeness of the man? He said he was a tall man with a long gray coat, booted, and one of his legs hanging over the arm of the chair, and his head hanging dead to the other side, and his arm backward as if it were broken. There were some English troops then quartered in the place, and there being at that time a great frost after the thaw, the county was covered with ice. 4 or 5 of the English riding by this house, some 2 hours after the vision, while we were sitting by the fire, we heard a great noise, which proved to be those troopers, with the help of other servants, carrying in one of their number, who had got very mischievous fall, and had his arm broke, and fallen frequently in swoons fits. They brought him into the hall, and set him in the very chair, and in the very posture that the seer had prophesied. But the man did not die, though he recovered with great difficulty. Among the accounts given to me by Sir Norman MacLeod, there was one worth of special notice, which was thus. There was a gentleman in the Isle of Harris, who was always seen by the seers with an arrow in his thigh. Such is the isle, who thought, though his prognostications infallible, did not doubt that he would be shot in the thigh before he died. Sir Norman told me that he heard the subject of a discourse for many years. At last he died without any such accident. Sir Norman was at his burial at St. Clement's Church in the Harris. At the same time, the corpse of another gentleman was brought in to be buried in the same very church. The friends on either side came to debate who should first enter the church, and in a thrice from words they came to blows. One of the number, who was armed with a bow and arrows, let fly one among them. Now every family of the isle have their burial place in the church in a stone chest, and the bodies were carried in open biers to the burial place. Sir Norman having appeared in the tumult, one of the arrows was found shot in the dead man's thigh. To this Sir Norman was a witness. In the account which Mr. Daniel Morrison, parson of the Lewis, gave me, there was one, though it be heterogeneous of the subject, yet it may be worth your notice. It was one of a young woman in his parish, who was mightily frightened by seeing her own image still before her, always when she came to the open air, and the back of the image always to her, so that it was not a reflection as in a mirror, but the species of such a body as her own, and very like habit, which appeared herself continually before her. The parson kept her a long while with him, and had no remedy for her evil, which troubled her exceedingly. I was told afterwards that when she was 4 or 5 years elder, she saw it not. These are matters of fact, which I assure you they are truly related. But these, and all others that occurred to me, by information or otherwise, could never lead me to remote conjecture of the cause of so extraordinary a phenomenon. Whether it be a quality of eyes of some people in these parts concurring with the quality of the air also, whether such species be everywhere, though not seen by the want of eyes so qualified, or from whatever other cause, I must leave to the inquiry of the clearer judgments in mine. But a hint may be taken from this image which appeared still to this woman above mentioned, and from another mentioned in Aristotle in the 4th of his Metaphysics, if I remember right, for it's long since I read it, and also for the common opinion of the young infants, unfold with the many objects, do see apparitions which were not seen by those of elder years, as likewise from this, that Faerie Laws did see the second sight when the Highlands or Isles, Yet transported to live in other countries, especially in America, they quite lose this quality, as was told me by a gentleman who knew some of them in Barbados, who did not see vision there, although he knew them to be seers when they lived in the Isles of Scotland. Thus far, my Lord Tarbott. Okay, we've got ads coming up, but that is an interesting thought, that if they leave the place where they were a seer, they lose the sight. Huh. Of course, I still like the American who said he was going to throw a dish of butter at a friend's head, and apparently did it in the Americas, and the guy ducked in Ireland. That just seems like something that would happen. But anyway, we are going to go ahead and go to ads, and then I will continue. So I will see you in a few. Go take care of yourselves real quick. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you all for still sticking around. I know it's not the most entertaining material to read, 400-year-old letters, but still, it's interesting to some of us. It's definitely interesting to me. But, folklore, I guess, isn't really for everyone to want to study. But it is a fascinating subject, and they're comparing second sight to psychic abilities, which also the description of how to have someone else see sounded like a weird game of Twister. But hopefully, I don't want anyone to step on, this wizard's feet. I don't like having my feet stepped on, especially when stood on. But the one guy who said he had to have hair tied around something on his waist, and he'd have to look between his legs to see them. Not sure what to say on that. And that's someone who's supposed to be a second seer, and they're describing their own means of being able to see. I think I will stick to hagstones. Or, obsidian mirrors. If anyone doesn't know, I'm actually letting a hagstone form. I've pretty much got a rock somewhere that water is constantly dropping on it. So, not streaming, but just dripping. Because that's kind of how hagstones are formed. Or if you're an author, any other way would work. But anyway, let's continue. So this is part 2 of the letter. My lord, after narrow inquisition, has delivered many true and remarkable observes from the subject, yet to encourage further scrutiny, I crave leave to say that 1. But a few women are endowed with the sight in respect to men, and their predictions not so certain. 2. This sight is not criminal, since a man can come by it unawares and without his consent, but it is certain he's see more fatal and fearful things than he do a gladsome. Well, no, I don't need any bots, thank you. 3. The seers avouch that severals who go to the Sith are people bereft and, in respect to us in peace, before the natural period of their lives expire, do frequently appear to them. 4. A vehement desire to attain this art is very helpful to the inquisitor, the inquirer, and the species of an absent friend, which appears to the seers as clearly as if he had sent his lively picture to present itself before him. It is fantastic shadow of a sick apparition, but a reality and a messenger coming for unknown reasons, not from the original similitude of itself, but from a more swift and pragmatic people which recreate themselves and offering secret intelligence to men who generally they are unacquainted with that kind of correspondence, if they had lived in a different element from them. 5. Though my recollections were written long before I saw my Lord of Tarbott's yet, I am glad his descriptions of mine correspond so nearly. The maid my lord mentions, who saw her image still before her, suiteth with the co-walker named in my account, which, though some at their first thought might conjecture to be the same, might conjecture to be the reflection of a cloud or mist as to the parallage, the whole air and every drop of water being a mirror that returns the species of things, your visive faculty sharp enough to apprehend them, or a natural reflection, from which the same reasons that an echo can be redoubted by air, yet it were more falsible to impute the second sight to the quantity infused in the eye of an unction, for witches have sleepy ointment that, when applied, troubles their fantasies, advancing it to have an unusual figures and shapes represented to it, as if it were a fit of fanaticism, hypochondriac melancholy, or possession of some insinuating spirit, raising the soul beyond its common strain, if the palpable instances and realities seen and innocently objected to, the senses did not disprove it, make the matter a very palpable variety, and no deception. Yet, since this sight can be bestowed without ointment or dangerous compact, the qualification is not so bad an original. Therefore, 6. By my lord's good leave, I presume to say that this sight can be no quality of the air nor of the eyes, because I live as such in the fame of air, and see all things as far off as clearly, yet have not the second sight. 2. A seer can give another person this sight transiently by putting his hand and foot in the posture that he requires of him. 3. The unfulfilled eyes of the infants can naturally perceive no new unaccustomed objects, but what appear to other men, unless exalted and clarified some way, as Balaam's ass for a time. Though in a witch's eye the beholder cannot see his own image reflected, as is the eyes of other people, so that descent of objects, as well as diversities of the subject, may appear differently on febrile tempers and ages. 4. Though also some are of so venomous a constitution, by being eradicated by envy and malice, that they pierce and kill, like a cockatrice, whatever creature they first set their eye on in the morning. So was it with Walter Graham, some time living in this parish wherein I am now, who killed his own cow after condemning its fatness, and its shot by condemning its fatness, and shot a hair within its eyes, having praised its swiftness, such an infection of an evil eye. Albeit this was unusual, yet he saw no object but what was obvious to other men as well as to himself. 5. If the being transported to life in another country did obscure the second sight, neither the person nor the maid needed be much troubled by her reflection self. A little peregrination, and coming from her wonted home, would have saved her fear. Wherefore, 7. Since the things seen by the seers are real entities, the presences and predictions found true, and a few illuded with this sight, and those not with bad lives, and addicted to malefices, the true solution of the phenomenon seems rather to be the courteous endeavors of our fellow creatures in the invisible world to convince us, in opposition to seducers and socians and atheists, of a deity, of spirits, of a possible and harmless method of correspondence betwixt men and them, even in this life, of their operation for our caution and warning, of the orders and degrees of angels, whereof one order, with bodies of air condensed and curiously shaped, may be next to man, superior to him in understanding, yet unconfirmed, and of the religion and of their region, habitation, and influences on man greater than that of the stars on inanimate bodies, a knowledge belike, reserved for these last atheistic ages, wherein the profanity of men's lives hath debauched and blinded their understanding as to Moses, Jesus, and the prophets, unless they get convictions of things formerly known, as from the regions of the dead, nor doth the ceasing of the visions upon the seer's transmigration into foreign kingdoms, make his lordship's conjecture of the quality of the air and eye a white and more probable. But, on the contrary, it confirms greatly my account that an invisible people, guardian over and careful of men, who have their different offices and abilities in district counties, as appears in Dan 10:13, viz., about Israel's, Grecia's, and Persia's assistant princes, whereof of so prevaileth given dominion and ascendance to his pupils and vassals over the opposite armies of countries, so that every country and kingdom having their own topical spirits or powers assisting and governing them. The Scottish seer banished to America, being a stranger there, as well as the invisible to the visible inhabitants, and wanting familiarity with his former correspondence, he could not have the favor and warnings, by the fevral visions and predictions, which were wont to be granted him by these acquaintances and favorites in his own country. For if what he wont to see were realities, as I have made appear, 'twere too great an honour for Scotland to have such seldom seen watchers and predominant powers over it alone, acting in it so expressly, and all other nations wholly destitute of the like, though without the peradventure of all other people wanting the right key of their cabinet, and the exact method of correspondence with them, except the sagacious active Scots, as many of them has retained it for a long time, and by surprises and raptures do often foretell what the kindness is really represented to them all fevral occasions. To which purpose and learned links Mr. Baxter on Revelations 12:7, writing of the fight betwixt Michael and the dragon, gives a very pertinent note, viz., that he knows not but ere great action, especially tragical, is done the earth, that first the battle and victory is acted and then achieved in the air betwixt the good and evil spirits. Thus it seems these were the men's guardians, and the like battles are oft times perceived in lust, and the next time, the event of which might easily be represented by some one of the number of the correspondents of earth, as frequently the report of great actions have been more swiftly carried to by other countries than by the art of us mortals could possibly dispatch it. St. Augustine, on March 9th, marketh that no small imitation of this truth, aversing that Elias appeared with Jesus on the mount in his proper body, but Moses in one aerial body, assumed like the angels had appeared, and notably to eat with Abraham, though no necessity on the account of their bodies, as likewise the late doctrine of the pre-existence of souls, living in aerial vehicles, gives a singular hint of the possibility of the thing, if not the direct proof of the whole assertion, which yet moreover may be illuminated by divers other instances of the like nature, and as wonderful besides what is above said as 8. The invisible wights which haunt houses seem rather to be some of our subterranean inhabitants, which we are often to men as the second sight, than evil spirits or devils, because though they throw great stones, pieces of earth and wood, at the inhabitants, they hurt them not at all, as if they acted non-maliciously like devils at all, but in sport like buffoons and drolls. All ages have afforded some obscure testimonies of it, and Pythagoras in his doctrine of transmigration, Socrates' demon, and gave him warning of future dangers. Plato's classing them into various vehicled species of spirits, Dionysus Epirgatus marshalling 9 orders of spirits, superior and subordinate, and the poets their borrowing of the philosophers, and adding their own fancies of fountain, river, sea nymphs, woods, hills, and mountain inhabitants, and that every place and thing, in cities and countries, had special invisible regular gods and governors. Cardan speaks of his father in seeing the species of his friend, in a moon sign night, riding fiercely by his window on a white horse, the very night his friend died at the vast distance from him, by which he understood that some alteration was suddenly in view, ensue. Cornelius Agrippa and the learned Dr. Moore have feverall passages tending that way. The noctambulos themselves would appear to have some sword and jockeying spirit possessing and supporting them, when they walk on deep waters in tropes of houses without danger, when asleep and in the dark. For it was no way probable that their apprehension and strong imagination setting in the animal spirits to work to move the body could preserve it from sinking in the depth or falling down headlong when asleep, any more than when awake. The body being then as ponderous as before, and it is hard to attribute it to a spirit subtly evil and enemy to man, because the noctambulo returns to his own place safe, and the most furious tribe of demons are not permitted by Providence to attack men so frequently, either by night or by day, for in our highlands, as there may be many fair ladies of this aerial order, which do often tryst with lascivious young men, and in quality of succubi, or lightsome paramours and strumpets, called Rhiannon-sith, or familiar spirits, in Deuter 1811. So do many of our Highlanders, as if this strangling by the nightmare, pressed with fearful dream, or rather possessed by one of our aerial neighbors, rise up fierce in the night, and apprehending the nearest weapons, do push and thrust at all persons in the same room as them, sometimes wounding their own comrades to death. The like whereof fell sadly out within a few miles of me at the written hereof. I add but one instance more, of a very young maid who lived near my last residence, that in one night learned a large piece of poesy by the frequent repetition of it, from one of our nimble and courteous spirits, whereof a part of pious and rest superfluous, for I have a copy of it, and no other person was ever heard to repeat it before, nor was the maid capable to compose it herself. 9. He demonstrated and made evident a sense of extraordinary vision of our Tramontan seers, and what is seen by them, by what is said above, having seen the same spectres and apparitions at once, having their visive faculties entire. For the non eft disputandum and gustu, it now remains to show that it is not unsuitable for reason nor the Holy Scriptures. First, that it is not repugnant to reason doth appear from this, that it is so less strange than the immortal sparks and souls to come and be immersed by the gross terrestrial elementary bodies, and be so propagated, so nourished, so fed, so clothed as they are, and breathe in such an air and world prepared them, than the Hollanders or Howell cavern inhabitants to live and traffic among us, in another state of being without our knowledge. For Raymond de Souvenin, in his 3rd book, chapter 12, argues quaintly that all sorts of living creatures have a happy rational polity of their own, with a great contentment, which govern in mutual converse of theirs they pride and plumb themselves, because it is unknown to man as man is to them. Much more that the sum of the highest spirit should assume the bodies like ours, convinces the world that no other thing that is possible needs be wondered at. 2. The Manu Kodoyeta, or bird of paradise, living in the highest region of the air, common birds in the 2nd region, and flies and insects in the lowest, men and beasts on the earth's surface, worms, otters, badgers, and waters, Likewise, hell is inhabited but in the center, and heaven at the circumference. Can we think the middle cavities of the earth empty? I have seen the Weems, a place where the county of Fife in Scotland, divers caves cut out of vast temples underground. The like is in a county of England, and the Malta is a cave, wherein stones of a curious cut are thrown in great numbers every day. So I have had barbed arrows of yellow flint that could not be cut so small and so neat, of so brittle a substance, by all the errant men. It would seem, therefore, that these mentioned works were done by certain spirits of pure organs, and not by devils, whose continual torments could not allow them so much leisure. Besides these, I have found 5 curiosities in Scotland, not much observed to be elsewhere. 1. The brownies, who in some families are drudges, clean the houses and dishes after they all go to bed, taking with him his portion of food and removing before daybreak. 2. The mason ward, which, though some make a mystery of it, I will not conceal a little of what I know. It's like a Urbane tradition, in a way that comments the Jason and Boaz, the 2 pillars erected in Solomon's temple, 1 Kings 7:21, with an addition of some secret sign delivered from hand to hand, by which they know and become familiar with one another. 3. The second sight, so largely treated of before. 4. Charms and curing by them many diseases, sometimes by transferring the sickness to another. 5. A being proof of lead, iron, and silver, a breed making men invulnerable. Divers of our Scottish commanders and soldiers have been seen with blue marks only, after they were shot with leaden balls, which seems to be an Italian trick, for they seem to be a people too curious and magically inclined. Finally, Irishmen and Northern Scottish, and our Ethel men are so much addicted and delighted with harps and music, as if, like King Saul, they were possessed with a foreign spirit. Only with this difference that the music did not put Saul's playfellow to sleep, but roused and awakened our men, vanquishing their own spirits at pleasure, as if they were impotent of its powers and unable to command it. For we have seen some poor beggars of them, chattering their teeth for cold, and that soon they saw the fire and heard the harp, leapt throughout the house like ghosts and satyrs. And these parallel stories in all countries and ages reported by these of obscure people, which are no dotages, so is it no more necessity to us to fully know their beginnings and manner of life, than to understand distinctly the polity of the 9 orders of angels, or with what oil the lamp of the sun is maintained so long and regularly, or why the moon is called a great luminary in Scripture, while it only appears to be so, or if the moon be truly inhabited, because telescopes discover seas and mountains in it, as well as flaming furnaces in the sun, or why the discovery of America was looked on as a fairy tale, and the reporters hooted as the adventure of ridiculous utopias, or the first probable adverters punished as adventures of new gods and worlds. Or why in England the king cures the stroma by stroking, and the 7th son of Scotland, whether his temperate complexion conveys a balsam, or sucks out the corrupting principles by a frequent warm sanative contract, or whether the parents of the 7th child puts forth a more eminent virtue to his production than to all the rest, as being the certain meridian and the height to which their vigor ascends, and from that first have the gradual declining of their seem beliefs, the feebleness of the body and its production. And then, 1. Why is not the 7th son infected himself by the contagion he extracts from another? 2. How can continual stroking with a cold hand have so strong a natural operation as to exhale all the infection's warming, corroding vapors? 3. Why may not a 7th daughter have the same virtue? So that it appears, albeit happy natural constitution concur, yet something in it above nature, therefore every age hath left some secret of its discovery. Who knows but this intercourse betwixt the two kinds of rational inhabitants of the same earth may not only be believed shortly, but as freely entertained, as well known as now the art of navigation, printing, landing, riding on saddles with stirrups, and discoveries of microscopes, which were sometimes of great wonder and hard to be believed. 10. Though I will not be so curious nor so pertemporary as he who will prove the probability of the philosopher's stone from Scriptures, Job 28, 1, 2, Job 22, 24, 25, or the plurality of worlds from John 14, 2, and Hebrews J 3, nor the circulation of blood from Eccles 12 and 6, nor the Tasmanical art of the blind and lame mentioned in 2 Samuel 5, 6, yet I humbly profess these passages, which may give some light to the subject at least, and show that this possibility and rank of people is not a thing impossible, nor the modest and innocent scrutiny of them impertinent or unsafe. The legion and brigand of spirits, mentioned Mark 5:10, besought our Saviour not to fend them away from the country, which shows they were demons. Loki, tropical spirits, or particular superintendents or supervisors assigned to that providence, and the power of the nations granted, Revelations 2:26, to the conquerors of vice and infidelity, sound somewhat to be purpose. Tarbott had a demon attending marriage, chapter 6, verse 15, and in Matthew 4 and 5, an evil spirit came in an invisible shape to tempt our Saviour, who himself denied that not the feasible appearing of the ghosts in our sight, but said their bodies were not composed of flesh and bones like ours. Luke 24:39. In Philip 2:10, our various subterraneans are expressly said to bow to the name of Jesus. Elijah, not intellectually only, but sensibly, saw Gazi when out of reach of an ordinary view. It wants not good evidence that these are more managed by God's spirits, good, evil, and intermediate spirits, among men in this world than we are aware of. The good spirits, ingesting fair and heroic apprehensions and images of virtue and the divine life, thereby animating us to act for a higher happiness according to our improvement, and relinquishing us as strangely upon our neglect, and are embracing the deceitful, fairy-like pictures and representations of pleasures and gain presented to our imaginations by evil and sportful angels, to allure an unthinking, ungenerous, and sensual life, not of them having power to compel us to any misdemeanor without our flat consent. Moreover, the life of ours being called a wayfare, and God saying that we're last there'll be no peace to the wicked, our bussy and silent companions also being called Sith, or people bereft and quiet, in respect to us, and with all ghosts appearing to men that want the second sight in the very shapes and speaking the same language, they did when they incorporate alive with us. A matter that is of an old and prescription tradition, our Highlanders making still a distinction betwixt Llao and Llao Sith, averring to the souls go to the Sith when dislodged. Many real treasures and murders being discovered by souls that pass from among ourselves, or by the kindness of these our airy neighbors, not of spirits can altogether inorganical, no less than the consents about purgatory, no state of rescue, Olympus patrum et infernum, inventions which, though misapplied, yet are not chimeras, and altogether groundless, for ab origine it is nothing but blash and faint discoveries of the secret republic of ours, here treated on, in addition fictions of monks doting on crazy heads, our creeds saying that our Saviour descended Sigduguav to the invisible place and people, and many divines supporting that the deity appeared in a visible shape seen by Adam in a cool day and speaking to him with one audible voice, and Jesus probably in the ministry and the invisible attendants conveying more meat of the same kind to the fire Thosend that was fed by him in the very loaves of fishes, for a new creation it was not. The Zimjum and Akum in Iapha 13, 21, 22. These satyrs, doleful unknown creatures of islands and deserts, seem to have a plain prospect that way. Finally, the eternal happiness enjoyed by the third heavens, being more mysterious than most of men take it to be, it is not a sense wholly adduced by Scripture to say that his sight and the due objects of it hath some vestige in holy right, but rather 'tis modestly deduced from it. 11. It only now remains to answer the obvious objections against the reality and lawfulness of this speculation. Question. How do you solve the second sight from compact in witchcraft? Answer. Though this correspondence with the intermediate unconfirmed people betwixt man and angel be not ordinary to all of us who are superterraneans, yet this sight falling to some persons by accident, and its being connatural to others from their birth, the derivation of it cannot always be wicked, and too great curiosity, indeed, to acquire any unnecessary art may be blameworthy, but the verse of the secret Commonwealth may, by permission, discover themselves innocently to us who are in another state, as some of us men do fishes, which are in another element, when we plunge and dive to the bottom of the sea, their native region. In the process of time, we may come to converse as familiarly with these nimble and agile clans, but the greater pleasure and profit, as we do now with Chino's antipodes. 2. Question. Question 2. Are they subject to vice and lusts, passion and injustice, as we who live on the surface of the earth? Answer. The seers tell us that these wandering aerial people have not such an impetuous and fatal tendency to any vice as men, as not being drenched from so gross and dredgy bodies as we, and yet are of the same imperfection state, and some of them making better essays for heroic actions than others, having the same measures of virtue and vice as we, and still expecting advancement to a higher and more splendid state of life. One of them is stronger than many men, yet do not incline to hurt mankind, except in commission as a gross misdemeanor, as for the destroying angel of Egypt and the Assyrians, Exodus 12:29, 2 Kings 10:35. They haunt most where the most barbarity, and therefore our ignorant ancestors, to prevent the insults of that strange people, used as rude and curse as a remedy, such as exorcisms, donations, and vows. But how soon ever true piety prevailed in the place, it did not put the inhabitants beyond the reach of authority, and these subtle, inferior inhabitants and colleagues of ours, the Father of all spirits and the person himself, having only command of his soul and actions, a concurrence they may have to what is virtuously done, for upon committing a foul deed one will find demur upon his soul, and if his cheerful colleague had deferred him. Question 3. Do these airy tribes procreate? If so, how are they nourished, and what period of time do they die? Answer. Supposing all spirits to be created at once in the beginning, souls to pre-exist to circle about through several states of probationship, to make them either totally inexcusable or perfectly happy against the last day, solves all the difficulties. But in very deed and speaking suitable to the nature of things, there is no more absurdity of a spirit to inform one infant in the body of airs than a body composed of a dull and dressy earth. The The best of spirits have always delighted more to appear into aerial than to terrestrial bodies. They feed most what on quintessences and ethereal essences. The pith and spirits only of woman's milk feed their children, being artificially conveyed, as air and oil sink into our bodies, to make them vigorous and fresh, and the shorter way of conveying a pure ailment without the usual digestions by transfusing it and transprying through the pores and veins, arteries, and vessels that supply the body, is nothing more absurd than an infant being fed by the navel before it is born than a plant, which groweth by attracting the lively juice of the earth through many small roots and tendons, whose coarser parts, be adapted and made communal in the whole, doth quickly coalesce in the ambient cold, and so are condensed and baked up into a confirmed wood in the one, and solid body which flesh and bone in the other. A notion which, if entertained and approved, may show that the late invention of soaking in the transfusion, not blood, but ethereal virtual spirits, may be useful both in the nourishment and health, whereof if a vestige of the damnable practice of evil angels, there is sucking of the blood and spirits out of the witches' bodies, till they drew them into the deformed and dry lineages, to feed their own vessels withal, leaving what we call the witch's mark behind. A spot that I have seen, as a small mole, horny and brown-colored, through which mark, when a large brass pin was thrust, both in the buttock, knife, and roof of the mouth, till it bowed and became cooked, the witches, both men and women, neither felt a pain, nor did bleed, nor knew the precise time when this was doing them, their eyes only being covered. Now, the air of a body, as well as the earth, no reason can be given why there may not be particles of a more vivific spirit formed of it in procreation than it is possible to be the earth, which takes a time and pains to rarefy and ripen it, ere it can come to some prolific virtue. And if our apting darlings did not thus procreate, the whole number would be exhausted after the considerable space of time. For though they are more refined bodies and intellectuals than we, and of far less heavy and corruptive humors, which cause the dissolution, yet yet many of their lives being dissonant to the right reason of their own laws and their vehicles not being wholly free of lust and passion, especially of those more spiritual and haughty sins, they pass, after a long healthy life, into one orb and receptacle fitted to their degree, till they come under the general cognizance of the last day. Told you this is like a technical manual. Question 4. Doth the acquiring of the second sight make any change on the inquirer's body, mind, or actions? Answer. The uncouth sight enfeebles the seer. Daniel, though familiar with divine visions, yet fell frequently down without strength, when dazzled with the power which had been ascendant of, and passed on him beyond his comprehension. Chapter 10, 8, and 17. So our seer is put to rapture, transport, and forced to death, as divested of its body and all its senses, when he is first made participant of the curious peace of knowledge. But it maketh no ramp or strain of the understanding of any, only to the fancies of clownish or lettered men, and creates some affrightments and disturbances because of the strongness that shows, and the unacquaintedness of them. And as for their life, the persons endued with this rarity are, for the most part, candid, honest, and sociable people. If any of them are subject to immoralities, the obstruse skill is not to be blamed for it, for unless themselves be the tempters, the colonies of the invisible plantations which they intercommune, do provoke them by no villainy or malefice, neither their first acquaintance nor after their long familiarity. So, having the second sight doesn't necessarily make you evil. Also good to know. Question 5. Doth not Sathan interpose such cases by many subtle, unthought insinuations as to him who lets the fly or familiar go out of the box, and yet found the fly in his own putting in as serviceable as the other would have been? Answer. The goodness of the life and designs of the ancient prophets and seers was one of the best proofs of their mission. I think I've got enough here for another stream because it's all further. This page 92. I've got 13 pages, I think. I don't know. I'm going to read next, so. At least I don't have to worry about the longness of this next section. Note. In trying to collect evidence as to the Redrick evil spirits from the Kirk session records, I have been most kindly assisted by the Reverend Mr. Nakanichi, Minister of Redrick, and Mr. Nakanichi finds that only 2 parishes in Stalworthy, Kells, and Girthan have records containing the years of 1695 and 1696. The records of Rarick do not go so far back. They are therefore left to the pamphlet of 1696 by Telfair, which is unusually businesslike statement, the names of attesting witnesses being added in the marginal notes. For phenomena singularly similar to those of Rarick, Obey, by Mr. H. J. Bell, may be consulted. Obey, Sampson, Low and Company, London, 1889, page 93. Another note. Notes. Introduction. Note A, p. 16. The Cyclical Society. The Cyclical Society, as far as the writer is aware, has not examined officially the old accounts of the phenomena which it investigates at present. The catalogue of the Society's library, however, proves that it does not lack the materials. Note B, page 30. Their speech is a kind of whistling. That the voices of spirits is a kind of whistling, twittering, or chirping is a very widely diffused and ancient belief. The ghosts of Homer twitter like bats. In New Caledonia, an English settler found that he could scare the natives from a piece of ground by whistling there at night. Mr. Samuel Wesley says, I followed the noise into almost every room in the house, both day and night, with lights and without, and have sat alone for some time, and when I heard the noise, spoke to it to tell me what it was, but never heard any articulate voice, and only once or twice, or 3 feeble squeaks, a little louder than the chirping of a bird, and not like the noise of rats, which I have often heard. Memoirs of the Weasley Family, page 164. Professor Alexander mentioned the peculiar whistling sound at some manifestations in Rio de Janeiro as rather frequent. POC, SPR 19, page 180. Here children were the mediums. How did they get the idea of the traditional whistle? See also the following note. Note C, page 40. Not long after the Spanish conquest of Peru. The phenomena alluded to here are said to have occurred in 1549. The evidence is a mere report by Cesar de Leon, who does not pretend to have been an eyewitness, but as Mr. Clements Markham, Sierra's editor, remarks, the phenomena are analogous to those of spiritualism. At the very least, we find a belief of this kind of a manifestation at a remote date and in an outlandish place. Cesar says, when the Adianto Belalcazar was governor of the province of Pampia, and the Gomez Hernandez was lieutenant in the town of Azurma, there was a chief in a village called Pirsa, about 4 leagues from the town, whose brother, a good-looking youth named Tamaraquanga, inspired by God, wished to go to the town of the Christians to receive baptism, but the devils did not wish that he should attain his desire, fearing that the last would seem secure, so they frightened this Tamakarantagunda in such a sort that he was unable to do anything. God permitting it, the devils stationed themselves in a place where the chief alone could see them, in the shape of birds called auras. Finding himself so persecuted by the devils, he sent in great haste to the Christian living near, who came at once, and hearing what he wanted, signed him with the sign of the cross. But the devils then frightened him more than ever, appearing in hideous forms, which only were visible to him. The Christian only said stones falling from the sky, and heard whistling. The brother of one Juan Pacio, citizen of the same town, then holding office in the place of Gomez Hernandez, who had gone to Caramans, came from the Ozurma with another man to visit the Indian chief. They say that Tamarisconda was much frightened and ill-treated by the devils, who carried him through the air from one place to another in presence of the Christians, he complaining, and the devil was whistling and shouting. Sometimes when the chief was sitting with a glass of liquor before him, the Christian saw the glass raise up in the air and put down empty, and a short time afterwards the wine was again poured into the cup from the air. Compare what in Batuta the old Arab traveler saw in the court of the king of Delhi. The matter is discussed in Colonel Yule's Marco Polo. This may suffice as a specimen of the manifestations they continued while the chief was on his way to church, while he was lifted into the air, and the Christians had to hold him down. In church the ghostly whistling was heard, and stones fell around, while the chief said that he saw a devil standing upside down, and himself was thrown into that unusual posture. The combination of convulsive movements with the other phenomena is that which we have already remarked in the case of Mr. H. and the grandson of William Morse. Cieza de Leon says that the chief was not troubled after his baptism. The illusions that the newly converted, so like those of the early Christian hermits, are described by Calloway in his Zulu tales. Note D, page 1. Priestley's explanation of the Upsworth disturbances is imposture to the servants, by way of a practical joke. Coleridge, on the other hand, says that all these stories, and I could produce 50 cases at least equally well authenticated, and as far as the veracity of the narrations, and the single act of their having seen and heard such sights and sounds, above the rational skepticism, are as much like one another as the symptoms of the same disease in different patients. It is a pity that Coleridge did not produce his 50 well-authenticated samples. The similarity of the narratives elsewhere all over the world is exactly what makes them interesting. Coleridge goes on, "This indeed I take to the true and only solution, a contagious nervous disease, some acme or intense form of which is catalepsy." Southway's Weasley, Volume 1, page 14, Coleridge's note. If there be such contagious nervous disease, it is a very remarkable malady, and well worth examining. The Wesleys were not alarmed. They bantered the spirit, and they wished they could set him to work, and beyond the trembling of the children when Geoffrey was knocking during their sleep, there is no sign of morbid conditions. A neighboring clergyman, who was asked to pass the night in the house, saw and heard just what the others saw and heard. The hypothesis of a contagious nervous disease, in which every witness exhibits the same symptoms of illusion in all parts of the world, is a theory which needs a good deal of verification. Where material traces of the disturbances remain, it is absurd to speak of contagious hallucinations. We must fall back to the hypothesis of trickery, or must say that Southey. Such things may be preternatural, yet not miraculous. They may not be in the ordinary course of nature, yet imply no alteration of its laws. Any theory is more plausible than the idea of Mr. Wesley and Mr. Hooley, who were in a state bordering on catalepsy. Believers in hypnotism may think it possible that this, that, and the other persons, if they submitted themselves to hypnotic influences, might have the same hallucinations suggested to them. But there is no evidence in the Epsworth case, nor in the Rarick case, of any such matter. So far as we yet know, sensory hallucination of several persons together, who are not in a hypnotic state, is a rare phenomenon, and therefore not a probable explanation. PRC, SPR, Volume 4, page 62. There is some evidence that epileptic patients suffer from the same illusions. For example, in the presence of a woman with a red cloak, and in delirium tremens, the horrors are usually similar. But that all the persons who enter a given household should be impressed by the same material illusions as of chairs and tables and even beds, like Nancy Wesley's, floating around, is a theory more incredible than the hypothesis either of trickery or of abnormal occurrences. And the disturbances always cease on the arrival of a competent witness. Then it is not hard to say which theory we ought to choose. For imposture, see the next note. Note E, page 57. Children at seances. The phenomena discussed are most frequently connected with children, who may be regarded either as mediums or impostors, conscious or unconscious. In Proc. SPR 4, from 25 to 42, Professor Barrett gives a case of a little girl whom he knew. She had raps wherever she went, even when she was alone with the professor, who made her stand with her hands against the wall at the greatest stretch of her arms, with muscles and legs and arms all at tension. A brisk pattering of raps followed the professor's request, but he also mentioned a boy of juvenile piety who for 12 months deceived his father, a distinguished surgeon, and all his family, by pretending spiritualistic manifestations which appeared at first sight inexplicable until the cunning trickery of the lad was discovered. The only difference between these cases is that an outsider discovered trickery in one instance and not the other. This is a very ticklish kind of certainty, and it is plain that children can do a great deal in the way of mere imposture. The state of any young Wesley who might have been caught out is inevitable. Verily, Mr. Weasley could not have spared for his crying. Note F, page 62. The pricking of witches. It is pretty certain that some of these unlucky old women were pricked in anesthetic areas. Note 8, page 8. The arrows that fly in the dark. The arrows of these ancient flint arrowheads, which Mr. Kirk later asserts to be too delicate for human artificers, in this matter Isabel Goward, the witch, confessed. As for elf arrows, the daredevil sharps with them with an ain hand, delivers them to elf boys, what whittles and digits them with a sharp thing like a prayer needle. But that was just in Elfland. I saw them whittling and lighting them. Isabel described the manner in which witnesses used artillery. We sprang them from the nails of our thumbs, and with these she and her friends shot and slew many men and women. The confessions of Isabel Gowey are in the 3rd volume of Picturn's Scottish Criminal Trials. They contain little or nothing of the physical, always mere folklore, fairy tales, and charms derived from old Catholic liturgy. The poor women, having begun to fabled with manifest enjoyment and considerable power. It seems from her account that each coven or assembled witches had a maiden in it, and without our maiden we could do no great thing. On the other hand, extraordinary cases of an epileptic boy who was hurled about and beheld distant occurrences in trance may be read in Chambers' Domestic Annals of Scotland, Volume 3, page 449. Candle was used to go out when this boy, a 3rd son of Lord Torpichen, was in the room. The date 1712 and the place, Midlothian, prevented anyone from being buried or bewitching him. The fast was proclaimed. The boy recovered and did good services in the navy. He is said to have been levitated frequently. Next note, page 11. Milk throw a hair tedder. Isabel Gowey confessed to stealing milk from a cow by magic. We'll plait the rope the wrong way in the devil's name, and we draw the tether between the cow's hind feet and betwixt her forward feet in the devil's name, and thereby take with us the cow's milk. Mr. Kirk, it was observed, did not connect the fairy kingdom with that of Satan, as some of his contemporaries were inclined to do. Note, page 19. The wraith is only envious fumes of a man, exhaled and congealed into various likenesses. What is this theory of men illiterate and unwary their observations, but von Hartmann's doctrine of the nerve force which issues from the body of these medium and then proceeds to set up fresh centers of force in all neighboring objects, while it still remains under the control of the medium's unconscious will? See Mr. Walter Lee von Hartmann's Der Giesler Hypothesis des Spiritismus, Pro SBR 19, page 293. It is amusing to find a learned German coinciding scientific theory with ignorant and unwary Highland seers. Both regard the phantasms as manifestations of nerve force and extraneous fumes, and as neither souls nor counterfeit spirits. Note, page 23, Faerie-Hills. The hypothesis that the fairies' belief may be traditional of the ancient race of dwelling subterranean homes is older than Mr. McRitchie or Sir Walter Scott. In his Scottish Scenery, 1803, Dr. Creary suggests that the germ of the fairy myth is the existence of dispossessed aboriginals dwelling in subterranean houses, in some places called pits houses, covered with artificial mounds. The lights seen near the mounds are light accidentally carried by the mound dwellers. Dr. Creary works out in some detail this marvelous absurd supposition, as the Quarterly Review calls it, volume 59, page 280. Page 30. Master Great Zarek, the Irish Stoker. Glanville, in Essays on Several Important Subjects, 1675, prints a letter from the Irish Bishop of Greatrex, the Stoker. He cured diseases by a sanative contagion. According to the bishop, Greatrex had an profession that he could do faith healing, and found that he could, but whether the virtues of some special power or by the people's fancy he knew not. He frequently failed, and his patients had relapses. See his own account of strange cures in a letter to Robert Boyle, London, 1666. Postscript. It has been said that no trace can be found of the printed Secret Commonwealth before 1815. The present editor is inclined to believe that in 1699 the work was still in manuscript. And Lord Rees by Mr. Samuel Pepys, October 24th, 1699, he says, "I have got a manuscript since I came to Scotland, whose author, though a parson, after giving full account of the second sight, defends there being no sin in it, which, the first opportunity, I shall send you a copy of his books." This description answers very well to Kirk's treatise, and no other contemporary work of which I am acquainted, unless it be a discourse of second sight, by the Reverend Mr. John Fraser, minister of Tyrian Hall. There were, doubtless, other parsons busy with these topics, and the minister of Rarick informs me that several MSS by Mr. Telfer, author of the tract, already quoted, were only dispersed in 1877. Examples of these psychical researchers may be found in C.K. Sharp's prefectory notes to Law's Memorials, Edinburgh, 1818. Such as one is Reverend Robert Knox, who writes from Cavers to the Reverend Mr. Wiley on the case of Sir George Maxwell of Pollock. He dare not attribute his mediumship of Janet Douglas positively to an evil cause. It is our ignorance of any natural agent that makes us impute the effects of evil spirits, from Memorials, page 75. Moreover, Lord Ray writes of his parson were still alive in 1699, whereas Mr. Kirk went to his own herd in 1692. I am promised the acquaintance of this man, of which I am very covetous. Lord Ray was the Turnus, and may not have heard of the mishap which carried the minister of Aberfoyle to Fairyland. It may be added that Dr. Hicks writes to Mr. Pepys about Neolithic arrowheads as a subject of near alliance to that of second sight and to witchcraft, which is akin to them both. He also speaks of a very tragical and authentic story told me by the Duke of Lauderdale, which happened in the same family of Sir John Dalrymple, Laird of Stair, and then Lord President. His Grace had no sooner told it me, but my Lord President coming into the room, he desired my lord to tell it himself, which, altering his countenance, he did with a very melancholic air, but it is so long since I dare not trust my memory with relating the particulars of it. June 19th, 1700. Dr. Hicks calls the first Lord Stair John. Scott calls him James. There can be no doubt that Dr. Hicks refers to the woeful tale of the Bride of Lammermoor, who died in September 12, 1669. Law, in his memorial, says that she was hurled through the house, by spirits, he means. By hurling, or tossing about the patient, probably epileptic, we have noticed in many of the old stories as a modern instance of Mr. H. Now, in his introduction to the Bride of Lammermoor, Scott gives all the authorities at his command, Law, Symonds' Elegy, and Hamilton in Wetland's Satire, which avers that Satan seized the bride and threw the bridegroom from the nuptial bed. Sir Walter was unacquainted with Dr. Hick's hint, which accidentally produces the bride's own father as evidence for the story which was plainly regarded as supernatural. It is most unlucky that Dr. Hicks distrusted his own memory. However, it is more something to feel assured that a memorable story was accepted at the time by the family of the bride, and was known to Lauderdale. Lauderdale himself, by the way, was a psychical researcher, and accommodated Richard Baxter with some accounts of haunted houses, published in his World of Spirits. One story of a haunted house where the spectral hand appeared he gives on authority of the Reverend James Sharp, afterwards a famous archbishop. Lauderdale inspected the famed London nuns, and saw only wanton wenches singing bawdy songs in French. His letter to Mr. Baxter is dated March 12, 1659. His best haunted house is of the Epworth type. Okay, well. That does that book. Got a feeling I'm going to have to do a lot of editing. But we are... No, it's almost 11. Let's see if we can find some to raid, or if anyone has a suggestion, feel free to shout it out. Honestly, you can use a shout out. I've got it set to anyone, just the exclamation SO. Because I really do, want you guys' opinions. Or, let's see. I haven't rated Falcor for a long time. Don't know. Oh, Harp Griffin's on. Just more working. There's a Wild Execute. Falcor's reading the Odyssey. Where is Harp working? Harp Griffin is transcribing something. Oop. She is transcribing the English Bread Book. Interesting. And Desk is doing Overwatch. What's Obscurus reading? No Good Man. So what you think, chat? Nothing? No? Anyone? Fry? You want to hear quiet talking, no talking, or Overwatch? How many do I have? I don't have anyone. Okay, well, I guess in that case, I'm not gonna raid. Because most of the people I know have like a minimum 3-person raid, especially if they're the bigger streamers. Oh, Salty's still here. Ah, you missed it. Yeah, okay, well, good raid dusk anyway. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow for Fairy Tales. Have a good night.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play. The echoes of forgotten tales, dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight.